I decided to go to Europe and borrowed the money to go to Europe and had to work to pay it off. And by that point, I decided I wanted to become a DP because after working with lights in high school, and to pay off this trip to Europe, I started to work at a place that rented lighting equipment, and I found that I felt like I was learning more and being paid for than I was getting from any education. So I just worked, and I worked really hard. I have a very good work ethic, or did back then at least.
Which company was that?
That was called Cinemobile. It was very interesting what was happening in the television and motion picture industry in the early 70s. There was a sea change in the kind and the content that they were producing, and also there was a generational shift occurring, and especially in television. Television really, when they started broadcasting television, there were no television technicians. They had to take people off the street, basically, train them, and then they became, that's how they got their product on the air. And to do this, they put people on staff. So they had these, through the 1950s and 1960s, they had these huge staffs that are just, of the technicians and the stagehands and all the, all of the behind the camera people worked for NBC. But because they were on staff, they might be a lighting director most days, but if they didn't have any need for a lighting director and they needed someone to operate a sound boom, then they'd come in and operate a sound boom. And they were kind of treated as, with not a huge amount of respect compared to anyone else in the crew. Even though a lighting designer has this enormous impact on the product. And so in the early 1970s, though, because of the Supreme Court ruling in the mid-60s that said that that the networks could not produce directly all of their product, that they had to use outside producers. And at first, the outside producers produced their product in the network studios. But soon the outside producers began producing in studios that they just rented that did not belong to the network, or in other locations. And in doing so, they needed technicians that were not at the networks. And so they started reaching out and developing a freelance talent pool of technicians and of artists. And so this big change was happening in the early 70s, where suddenly there was a new marketplace. And here I was working in this place that rented film equipment primarily. And I was getting a little disillusioned with it after a couple of years, and so I was going to go try to get some work elsewhere, and a gaffer named Doug Pentek, who at the time was the biggest film gaffer, and a gaffer is the person that implements the lighting, or the director of photography's vision in light. And Doug said, "Oh, you should just get in the union. You're too good." And so he just made one call. I'd been trying to get in the union for 2 years, and I'd filled out applications, everything else, nothing. He made one call, and that afternoon I got a call back to go work on a production. It was at Universal, and it was on a series called Banachek. And I worked on that television series, Banachek, for 9 solid months. So it was like my life just changed overnight.